When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: Hungry Man. User: D1042. Posted October 9th, 1997.
I've been eating breakfast down at the old Hillcrest Diner at least 3-4 times a week for almost 20 years. Ain't much to look at. Paint peeling on the windows, vinyl boots patched with duct tape, linoleum that never comes clean, no matter how much they mop, but it's comfortable, familiar. Most mornings, I take the third stool from the end of the counter, same as always. Don't even bother ordering. Josie, the waitress, knows what I want. 1 biscuit drowned in sausage gravy, 2 eggs over medium, and a couple strips of bacon. Coffee, black. She brings it with a smile and a morning hank, same as she said 1,000 times before. That's the way it works in a small place like that. Everybody's got their seat, their order, their little ritual. Half the folks in there could probably recite each other's breakfast down to the brand of jelly on their toast, and for damn near 2 decades, it never changed. Until that storm. Clouds had been piling all morning. Sky gone from blue to slate gray, and by the time I slid onto my stool, the air already had that heavy, charged smell. You could feel it building, the kind of storm you know is gonna break hard. I'd just cut into my eggs when the lights flickered. Josie laughed nervously, and she hoped we got through breakfast before the power gave out. A few chuckles around the room, nothing serious, and then the whole place went black. We had just the lightning for light. Jagged flashes that lit everything white-blue for a second before dropping us back into pitch. Thunder rattled the windows, rain started hammering the roof. Folks muttered, joked about free meals if the register went down. I took another sip of coffee, tried to act like my gut wasn't twisting, and then the bell over the door jingled. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway, shoulders near filling the frame. Boots heavy on the tile, shirt half untucked, hands big and scarred. He didn't track in any rain. Didn't say a word, just walked straight to the counter and slid onto the stool 2 down from me. Something about him was wrong. The smell came first. Mud, rot, something sour underneath. Josie hesitated, but habit's a strong thing. Coffee? She asked, her voice thin in the dark. The man didn't answer, just reached sideways, fast, and snatched the biscuit off my plate, shoved the whole thing in his mouth and chewed, loud and wet. I pushed back, half out of my stool. What the hell? He didn't look at me, just reached again, grabbed my bacon, crammed it between his teeth, and kept chewing like an animal. "Sir," Josie said, firmer now, "you can't do that." The man turned on the trucker sitting next to him, grabbed his eggs, stuffed them in, chewing, gulping, grease dripping down his chin, and that's when folks started shouting. Some stood, some backed away. The man didn't care. He just moved plate to plate, pulling food like it was his by right. And when the lightning hit, I saw it plain. His teeth were not right. There were too many rows, and they were too sharp. Earl, one of the mill boys, had enough. A big kid, strong, never took shit from anyone. He grabbed the stranger by the shoulder, tried to haul him off the stool, but the man moved quicker than I could blink, jaws wide, biting deep into Earl's arm. The sound was sickening, a tearing crunch, and Earl's scream went high and thin, cut right through the thunder. The man jerked back, half Earl's forearm hanging from his jaws. Blood sprayed across the counter, black in the strobe of lightning. Panic tore through the diner. People scrambled for the door, knocking chairs over, tipping over each other. Josie screamed. The man stood, now towering, face slick with blood, and grabbed the farmer at the next booth. One twist, one bite, and half the poor bastard's shoulder was gone. Each and every lightning strike froze the scene in horror. The man lunging from table to table, biting, tearing, swallowing chunks of flesh like he hadn't eaten in years. Folks swinging coffee pots, plates, fists, nothing slowed him down. He bit through glass, through bone, through whatever was in front of him. I dropped to my knees, crawled under the counter. I couldn't breathe, heart hammering like a drum. I could hear him chewing, gulping, hear the wet slap of meat hitting tile. The copper stench filled my nose. The screams cut off sudden, one by one. Another flash, and he was bent over a booth, tearing into a woman's chest. Another, he had Clyde pinned to the floor, ribs snapping under his jaws. Another, he dragged a kid out from under a table, teeth sinking into his leg. I covered my head and prayed, but the storm kept lighting the room, showing me every other second of it. The floor turned slick, the air thick with rot and iron, and then silence. The chewing stopped and the thunder faded. I opened my eyes and the fluorescence buzzed back to life. I stood slow, knees shaking, head spinning. The man was gone. The stool where he'd sat was empty, the door shut tight, but the diner, God help me, the diner was a slaughterhouse. Blood was everywhere, across the counter, pulled on the floor, spattered high on the walls, bodies slumped in booths, torn and ragged, pieces missing. Earl's boots still twitched by the door, his body crumpled nearby. Josie lay behind the register. Her throat was gone. Every face I'd known for almost 20 years, gone. Torn apart in the place we'd all laughed and eaten 100 mornings together. I staggered outside and rain poured down, washing some of it from my hands, but the smell stayed. The neon sign buzzed, sputtering back to life in the window. Hillcrest Diner, open 6 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Subject, Cutter. User, Fuzz18R. Posted, September 13th, 1996.
We should have known better, or at least I should have. As a man, it's hard to make friends after you get out of high school. You go to work, you go home, maybe you run into some guys from class in the bar on Friday, but that's about it. And if you don't meet some dudes in the bar you want to hang out with again, how do you ask without it sounding like you're trying to take them on a date? And you don't ever want to confuse your drinking buddies with your real friends. I know a guy, Warren, we've had some times out in the bar, man, but every time I've seen him on the street, there isn't even a hint of recognition in his eyes. There are bar friends, there are work friends, and there are real friends. Jess, he was a real friend, and I gave him up to keep myself alive. Jess and I met in our freshman year of high school and stuck to each other like glue from there on out. We were odd ducks in our little town, not quite nerds, not quite jocks, not quite greasers, but with enough knowledge for each group to let us in a little ways before they rejected us. We got used to it after a while and formed our own little group of two. After high school, we both got jobs working for Circuit City and kept on the way we had, except with the addition of booze on the weekends. It could be lonely sometimes, mostly when you'd see other people with big groups of friends moving through the world like nothing could touch them, but Jess and I built a whole world between us and did our best to hide it. When we turned 21, we started hitting the bars. The idea was we were looking for girls, but we were both so fucking clueless about the opposite sex that saying we were hunting for werewolves would have been equally believable. Friday and Saturday nights, we'd park ourselves at McMahon's and down beer after beer, watching the world like it was a Discovery Channel special. It never occurred to me that the world was watching us back. Henry came to us first. I suppose he'd have to because we didn't have the machinery for reaching out to other people. Looking back on it now, I think he knew that, knew how to look for it and use it. He was a good-looking dude, tall and broad, with just enough stubble to highlight his big, square jaw. He was the polar opposite of Jess and I, chubby, soft, on the short side, and when he walked up to our table, I thought he was going to mess with us, which happens sometimes. Instead, he said something I'll never forget. "I bet you boys have seen it all, haven't you?" He flattered us. In hindsight, he had probably seen us at McMahon's more than once and sized us up, two wallflowers who didn't have friends, who wouldn't be missed if they went away. He saw all that and came over to tell us how clever we were for standing apart from the crowd, and once we saw he wasn't there to fight us, we ate it right up. He introduced himself as Henry Pace, a mechanic who had just moved to town from Bowmansville. Between Jess and I, we knew enough about cars to make conversation. Then, after a while, Henry casually mentioned that he liked movies too. He knew a lot about them, as it turned out, and like that, he was in. Henry was the third musketeer. We used to pick him up at a house over on Dunlevy, a white stucco A-frame that used to belong to a friend of my mother's. It never occurred to me until after everything was said and done that Jess and I never actually saw him go into or out of that house. Whenever we picked him up, he'd be waiting outside. Again, I should have known better. Guys like him, guys who look like they belong in the world, don't make friends with guys like us unless there's a reason. Back in high school, I'd expect someone like Henry to try and get in my good graces, so I'd do his homework. Now that there wasn't any homework to do, I let my guard down and assumed he actually wanted to be buddies. Maybe after a long, cold dark, the world was finally opening up to us. Stranger things have happened, right? It was August when he drugged us. taken a couple cases of beer out to the flats south of town and started a pallet fire. Bonfires had been a big part of teenage social life at our school, but we'd never been invited and consequently we'd never gone. Now, though, at Henry's urging, we could have our own bonfires. We'd always set them in the same place, a spot he directed us to, maybe 8 miles further out than the stretch of flats where our peers partied. In summer, the river stayed low enough that the sun baked its exposed bed into a hard clay where you could go 4x4ing, mud bogging, or paintballing. On the upper portions of the bed, the parts that got the most sun, tall patches of bright green switchgrass grew, and when the wind blew, it rustled together in a way that sounded like hushed voices. An abandoned trailer sat in the woods at the edge of the river, its front covered with broken windows that looked like jagged teeth, its white and green paint job peeling. We were drinking bottles of beer, so I don't know how he slipped the sedative into our drinks. All I know is that usually I could put away 10 to 12 beers before I got sloppy, but that day it came on after 3 at the most. The world around me swayed, and I reached out to steady myself on my lawn chair. A moment later, Jess did the same, his face gray. Henry played it straight right till the end. He leaned over, a look of concern in his eyes, and asked if I was all right. I said I wasn't sure, that the booze was hitting me harder than usual. Then he smiled and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was the first time he'd ever touched me, and if I'd had the strength, I'd have recoiled. His hand was like steel, digging into my muscle painfully, as if he was trying to find bone. Pain aside, his touch was repulsive, like something wriggling past you in murky lake water. A terrible dread set in. Henry smiled, and the mask fell away. His features were the same, but arranged in a way I hadn't seen before. There wasn't any trace of concern or really any human emotion at all. Just a cold, animal satisfaction. My eyelids were heavy. To my left, I heard Jess groaning. Henry spoke, his voice toneless. "Go to sleep, big guy. It's almost over." I didn't want to, but the leaden feeling settling over my body was impossible to resist. The world went away. When I came to, my head throbbed and I could feel a coarse blindfold tightened over my eyes. My arms, I quickly realized, were bound above me, and my body weight was pulling sharply on my shoulders. My mouth was stuffed with what tasted like an oily rag, stifling my attempts at a scream. Trying to get my breath, I almost gagged on the filthy cloth until someone pulled it out of my mouth. A voice spoke. "Henry." "There he is. I knew it would be you, Chris. I have a knack for these things." "Henry, what is this, man? What's going on?" Footsteps. Henry's voice drawing closer. I felt rough hands plucking at the blindfold. Light flared at the edges of my vision until I could see again, the late afternoon light almost blinding. I blinked owlishly. Henry was standing there, completely naked. He was as muscular as he looked with clothes on and completely hairless. Somehow, that was the most disturbing part. It made him look like a serpent or a lizard. His left hand held the rag that had been covering my eyes, and in his right was a hunting knife, its honed edge glinting in the light that came through the patchwork ceiling. We were in a mobile home. The mobile home, I realized. The one we'd been partying next to for months. Behind Henry was a sleeping bag on the ground, surrounded by piles of trash, clothes, and stinking containers of what I could only assume were rotting food. There were masking nets stretched across the broken windows, hiding the inside from casual observers like me and Jess. Jess! My heart pounded and I looked around, sighing in relief when I saw him hanging in the same position as me, 5 feet to my left. Henry smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Yes, Jess is here, but you woke up first, so you get the choice. I looked back toward him. Henry, what the fuck is this, man? Did we do something? Did we offend you somehow? He advanced toward me, the knife held lazily at his side. You didn't do anything, Chris, not a single thing. That's why you're here. I picked you both because you've never done a thing in your life, but you think that's a virtue rather than a defect. You think that being an observer exempts you from the rules, but it doesn't, Chris. Life happens whether you want it to or not, and so instead of living yours, you met me. But there's good news. You woke up first, so you get the choice. My shoulders ached, and the pounding in my head was harder than ever. I could dimly hear Jess groaning as he started to wake up. What choice, man? Who dies today? You or Jess? My mind went blank. A sick, metallic taste filled my mouth. It's okay, Chris. There's no hurry. I've done this a lot, and almost everyone needs a little while to get used to the idea. After all, to most people, death is something that happens to someone else, an abstract idea with no real meaning. They piss their time away as observers, waiting for some signal that life is finally starting. Most of them die still waiting for that signal, Chris, but not you. Not anymore. Trying to find my voice again, I sputtered. Henry, come on, we don't deserve this. We haven't hurt anybody. He shook his head, those soulless eyes never leaving mine. I know, if you had, we wouldn't have found each other, but instead, you took the easy path every single chance you got. Beer by beer, burger by burger, wasted day by wasted day. You and Jess both. At the mention of his name, I looked over toward my friend. Jess didn't look good. He was still gray and his eyes were half-lidded. Jess, wake up, man. You gotta wake up. His head lolled towards me. He had obviously heard my words, but couldn't respond. Henry clicked his tongue. I might have gone too heavy on Jess's dose. Whoops, well, it happens. You should be grateful, Chris. This makes your choice easier, but you gotta make it fast because if Jess dies before I let you out of here, you're my guy. What does that mean? I'm gonna kill one of you, Chris, with this knife right here. Either you or Jess. I'm gonna skin you, gut you, joint you, and bone you. While you're still alive, well, mostly. Folks don't usually survive the gutting, although I'm getting better at keeping them alive longer. Practice makes perfect after all. My insides turned to ice. Jess let out a ragged groan. What the fuck? But why? Henry shrugged, his muscles bunching under the smooth skin. Because I want to, because I enjoy it, because you can't stop me. I sputtered again. But why let one of us live? Henry gave a thoughtful look. Because I like knowing you'll live the rest of your life thinking about me. Wondering if every creak in your house is me waiting in a closet to finish the job, and maybe one day it will be. Jess vomited again, a weak, despairing sound. A thin river of slime came out of his mouth, staining his shirt. Time to pick, Chris. Are you going to be a good friend and let Jess live his life, or are you going to take a second chance to actually live yours? With that, he drew so close to me I could feel the heat off his naked skin. The knife gently grazed my cheek, heat blooming in its path. The panic was so instantaneous that the words were out of my mouth before I could even think of it. Me, I don't want to die. Jess groaned again, twisting at the end of his bonds, I watched the knife rise up out of sight and felt it tugging roughly at the fabric binding my wrists. With a tear, the restraints gave way and I collapsed to the ground, knocking the air from my lungs. I gasped for breath, inhaling dust and dirt off the trailer's filthy floor. Henry's iron grip was on my neck as he dragged me to my feet. He leaned in close, his breath hot in my ear. "Good boy. Now get out of here, Chris. Your car is gone and it's a long way back home, and don't bother coming back. There won't be anything to find." I turned to look at Jess one last time. He was still drugged, but I saw hatred in his eyes. He knew what I'd done and understood what it meant. "I'm sorry, Jess. I couldn't." Henry stepped toward Jess and slid the blade across his face the way he had mine. The knife was so sharp the skin looked like it was separating without even being touched, blood cascading out of the open wound. Jess slurred a scream. It sounded like he was underwater. "Go, Chris. I like to play alone." I ran, past the sleeping bag and piles of trash, out the weather-beaten screen door, into the tall grass of the riverbed. All I could hear above the pounding of my heart in my ears was the wind rushing all around me. Dry whispers that knew what I'd done. In the distance, I was certain I heard my friend scream. It's been 5 years and I've never seen Henry again. Or Jess. There was a brief hiccup at work when he stopped showing up for shifts, but our manager just hired someone else and put his last paycheck into an envelope in the file cabinet. As far as I know, it's still there. As for Henry, I eventually went back to that little A-frame where we used to pick him up, and it won't surprise you to know that he never actually lived there. If I had to guess, he lived in that trailer the entire time we knew him. I wish I could say that what Henry did caused a fundamental shift in how I live, but it didn't. Well, I drink more so I can sleep through the creaking at night. He was right about that part. Instead, I go through the motions, living half a life and asking myself every day if Jess would have done the same if he'd had the choice. I miss him. Maybe one day I'll work up the courage to go and ask him myself.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.